What I'd like you to imagine that you're setting sail on a tall ship voyage, and you've arrived at your ship, and once you've confirmed that the name on the ship is a very distinctive ship, but once you've confirmed it is the one you're going to go on, your eyes will probably look at the bowsprit and the hull, and then your eyes will inevitably go up the masts, out on the rigging, and also looking at the yards. And I can imagine most of you thinking, I'd love to be up there. There will, however, be one or two people that might think, not really sure, I'll give it a go perhaps. So anyway, in the course of this evening, I'll take you all up there. Let me just... Yep. I started sailing with the Sail Training Association on these two beautiful schooners, the Sir Winston Churchill and Malcolm Miller. And my first voyage was a birthday present from my wife Tricia, and it was 2 weeks on the west coast of Scotland in February, or 2 weeks in the Canaries in May. And I'm sure you can guess which one I went for. And it was a fabulous time. And as a result of my being a crew member and sailing the way I did, I was invited back to be a watch leader on subsequent voyages. And so that's how my attachments with tall ships, with Sail Training Association, later named the Tall Ships Youth Trust, how it all started. The schooners were pensioned off, retired in 2000, and the trust bought 2 brigs. They're 600 tons, 200 feet long. They're much bigger ships than the schooners, and they take a complement of 65. They were sold off, both of them were sold off a couple of years ago, because it was becoming increasingly difficult to man these ships all year round, both with adult voyages and youth voyages. And so the difficult decision was taken to sell them and fundraise to buy a smaller ship, a smaller square-rigged sailing ship. So where do the crews come from? For the youth voyages, they come from schools, universities, work, places of some government agencies, including the probation service. And so it's a real mix of people, young people. But one of the great things about it is it's a great leveling experience, because almost nobody has sailed on a tall ship before. And so everyone starts from essentially the same position. A mix of anxiety, nervousness, excitement, all the things that that standing in front of a ship will bring on. And for adult voyages, anyone from 18 to 80, they've been drawn from a mix of people, different reasons, celebratory reasons sometimes, or maybe struggling with some personal difficulties, and they've come out to explore something different. So we start with the permanent crew. The captain is inevitably the person who leads the ship and looks after is the responsible person for the entire enterprise. The chief officer tends to be the one who runs the ship day to day, supported by the second officer. The boatswain looks after all things above decks, and the engineer, all the systems and the engines, of course, below decks. And some would argue that the ship's cook is, if not the most important person on the ship, and certainly one of them. And their commitment is to provide 3 meals a day for 65 people on time, whatever the weather conditions. And even though the crew members may not be always ready to eat the food, the ship's cook invariably presents the food in the right way. When the weather's a bit lively, then some people don't want really to eat very much. So that's the permanent crew, and the volunteer crew, such as myself, 3 watch leaders and some assistants, will help to support the permanent crew and also look after the voyage crew or the trainees. And it's the voyage crew, trainees, that live on the ship. They help out, they sail the ship, and generally discover whether or not they like sailing, because in many circumstances people haven't had a chance to sail on anything, let alone a square rig tall ship. So the bunks, top right corner, you'll notice the bunks are a canvas. They're carefully designed with quite a deep scoop, so that for most weather conditions the person inside them won't get thrown out. That's really quite important. It's very unsettling if you're at risk of being thrown out without any lee cloths. And bottom right corner, people take it in turns to help out, usually for half a day in the galley and in the mess, helping the cook and helping to lay up and wash up. And sometimes some of the crew members will help out with the bosun or with the assistant engineer if they've got an engineering inclination. And then on the bottom left, there's young folks are learning to sail the ship. And for most of the time, the officers and the watch leaders don't touch the wheel. We teach the crew to sail the ship under the command of the captain or the first officer. And so it's one of those disconcerting things for those that sail yachts regularly. You turn the wheel or you push the tiller over, and it's pretty responsive. Whereas with a 600-ton ship under square sails, you can turn the wheel a little bit and nothing happens. Or you think you're going to turn it a bit more and nothing happens. And then eventually you find you've overcorrected, you've gone too far, because the ship does respond eventually. And then there's a battle of correction and overcorrection. And so we teach all the crew to control steering, to manage the bridge, to act as lookouts, to keep logs, as a regular part of their duties. The ship runs on a watch system, and the typical watch system, 4-hour units, except for the dog watches in the late afternoon that breaks up the cycle. And my favorite watch is the 0400 to 0800 morning watch, because invariably where we have sailed and where I love to sail, the weather's generally pretty good. And there's nothing quite like being on the bridge as the sun's coming up. It's a brand new day, and you know that duties have been pretty good through the night, and it's chance for breakfast and then getting on with the day's routines. So that's one of my favorites. There are some people have different preferences. Some people like a short watch, which is okay, but it comes back to you later on. So during most of the time with 3 watches, you do 4 hours on and then up to 8 hours off. But during the day, there's an overlay of activities. And one of the most important is the captain or the first officer brief us all on plans for the day. So it's, where are we? And it's really wonderful that most of the time they do know where we are. So the captain, in this case, Barbara Campbell, a super captain who's sailed with tall ships for a number of years and recently moved to Jubilee Sailing Trust, where she's a senior captain there. So that's, where are we? Where are we planning to go? What we may see, if it's some coastal areas, we might see different things, whether it's around England or Wales or Scotland, or whether we go further afield around the European coast or into the Med. So it's points of interest. Maybe there's a plan to go to port for the afternoon or the evening, and anything else that may be relevant for our sailing. It's also a chance for any crew member to ask questions or to raise any issues, any concerns that they've got. So that's really useful every morning to do that. One of the things you may remember when you start a new job is people talk to you about learning the ropes. And that expression stemmed from sailing ships, where you will, when you step on board, you do literally learn the ropes. And there's a couple of important rules of thumb. One is the longer the rope. So, for example, this is quite a long coil. The higher up the effect is in the rigging, and this is the thicker the rope, the heavier the loading on it. So that may be supporting one of the upper yards. And this monster on the right of the mast is both very thick and very long. So it may well be supporting one of the upper yards for those that are moved into position when the sails are being used. So you'll see the pin rails are all very tidy. Generally, the ropes are coiled to keep them off the deck, particularly when it's wet, so they're not sitting on water. But that's learning the ropes. And one of the most important things with with crew members is safety training. And Jane, when she was bosun, showing some young crew members how to handle the lines, how to handle the ropes. And it's really important that, for example, they don't stand in the loops, because then if they're not aware of the danger of that, then they have to be told not to do that. So they're taught how to handle the ropes. And if you look down the side of the ship, there's a number of, many ropes that are generally thinner and lighter, and they tend to be sail control lines, so that when the sails are released from the yard, they hang like a Roman blind. And so these lines either pull the sail down to then be set by sheets and clewlines, or they're pulled up by ropes, a number of ropes called buntlines, which haul them up to depower them completely. So all the ropes are all left tidy, so that when you've finished with handling a particular rope, it's ready for somebody else to come and take it up and use it in the same way that you did. Another part of the morning is what's known as happy hour. And now some people might think that's an opportunity to sit in a chair with a little cheeky cocktail. But I have to say, happy hour in tall ships terms is grab a broom, a mop, a duster or brush or something or other, and we all take it in turns to sweep the ship, clean the ship from end to end, both above and below decks. And there are some folks I've looked after that don't really know which end to hold, because they clearly haven't done that much housekeeping in the past. So anyway, it's very important to make sure the ship is really clean when you've got a lot of people living in relatively close confines. The rum tub is very important. Less so now, but it used to be very important with early sailing. And in the old days, the old voyage of 1600s, the crews on long voyages found that water that was stored in barrels didn't really keep very successfully. It went sour. But beer did keep. And so it was beer that was stored in the barrels for longer voyages for the crew members. And their ration was 1 gallon of beer per day per sailor, just purely for hydration terms. And the officers had an allowance of 2 pints of wine per day. But when they discovered the West Indies, and somewhere along the way they discovered rum, then that was accepted as a measure that could be given to the sailors each day. And so it was around 1655 that the tot was accepted, and a tot for each sailor each day was a half pint of 95 proof rum served on the upper decks. And then, because it's really strong stuff, it was mixed with water to form grog, what was known as grog. And it was served out of the rum tub. And it's really important that it was supervised by an officer, because pursers, whose duty it was to serve the rum, sometimes a purser would over dilute the drink and then pocket the difference, would basically store the difference and sell it on privately, or take some advantage. So it's really important for crew morale that the rum tot, or the grog, was not only served correctly, but seen to be served correctly. And this lasted for several hundred years, these allowances, until the Admiralty became increasingly uneasy about mixing strong drink with nuclear weapons and advanced control systems, as you would expect. And so it was in 1970 that the Admiralty finally abolished the tot. For those in the audience that may be ex-Royal Navy personnel or have some association with the service, they may remember it as what was known as Black Tot Day. And there's a banner in the Royal Solent Yacht Club in Yarmouth that commemorates that particular time. It was the 31st of July 1970 when the tot was finally abolished. It is given on a rum ration or drink ration is given on very special occasions, and it has to be declared by the sovereign as splice the main brace. Now, there's an historic story about splicing the main brace, where the term came from, but for the purpose of today, it's a declaration that the sovereign can command that there is an issue of rum or other drinks for each sailor on a special occasion. There once was the Spithead Review quite some time ago, and more recently on the birth of a royal child. So Prince William, with his children, would have his mum would have declared splice the main brace, and the Admiralty would have issued the rum. We don't drink alcohol on ships anymore, but we have the next best thing, which is occasional tea breaks. And I've got a few members of my watch here. There's Linda and Debs, who joined the Royal Berkshire Yacht Club, and Pete, who I'll come back to in a moment, and Ying. They're few on my watch. And you'll notice we're all wearing a safety harness, and we have tethers attached as well. So if we're on duty on a watch, then we wear these as a matter of course. And it's a chance to discuss what we've done or what we're planning to do. And one of the things that's done quite early in the voyage is what's called up and over. And it's a familiarization exercise where each person is encouraged to climb the rigging, climb the rope ladder, ratlins, up to the fighting top, and then clip on with your tether and cross. There's a little wire rope that takes you from one side to the other, supervised carefully by watch leaders or deckhands or the bosun. And then you come down the other side. And it's a tremendous feeling of achievement, great sense of achievement. even though your legs might by that time be trembling quite a bit from the exertion and the adrenaline surge. But 60-foot climb is quite an effort, and certainly coming down safely on the other side. And that's partly just familiarization with climbing into the rigging, but it's also the first step of then going out onto yards and helping to set the sails. Some people, in the glare of publicity, really cannot manage the climb. So I've often taken people on one side, just maybe one or two people, and just done 2 or 3 steps, 3 or 4 steps, and then come down again, and then maybe later in the day do a few more, so that over a few days the person concerned can climb, touch the fighting top, or even go up over it, transit the top and come down the other side. So if for some reason somebody didn't want to do it at all, then there's no problem with that. We've got room for that. With this particular photograph, it looks like a masterclass on the yards. I'm up on the upper yard in the middle, so that I can keep watch, keep an eye on both sides of my watch. There's a guy right in the end, Rob Hammond, who's got his own foot rope, because it's quite a tricky position being out on the yard, on the end of the yard, which is called the yard arm. And so you have your own foot rope, which is called a Flemish horse. And then you'll see under the yard generally, there's a foot rope that runs right to the center, and then another one from the center right to the other end. And that's where you balance yourself, and then you handle the sail. And because there's so many people up there, I think it's more a familiarization exercise, just to get used to being up there holding on. It's really quite important. Well, in fact, it's very important. A different view is from looking at the yard above, and you'll see, I'm not sure if you can see that wire rope. That's a jackstay that runs uninterrupted from one end of the yard to the other. And before anybody gets anywhere near the yard, they're still standing on the rope ladder, and they clip on with their tether, and then shout out very loudly, stepping on. And that statement lets anybody know on the yard that you're stepping on, because when you step onto the shared foot rope, the balance changes quite considerably. And with the guy behind me, Jesper, big guy, if he steps on or steps off the foot rope, you know about it, because the position that you are on the foot rope and on leaning against the yard changes quite dramatically. There's also a steel bar that runs down on top of the yard that you hold on to, and to which various lines, short lines, are attached, like they're called gaskets, which tie up the sail. And if you look at the yard above, the sail is quite loosely gathered, and that's essentially called a Harbour Stowe. It's just get rid of the sail, so it's been pulled up and it's just been tied up fairly roughly with a few of the gaskets, and it's just ready to be redeployed if or as and when necessary. And the most important thing is 2 or 3 people on each yard would, if we're setting a sail, would be ease the gaskets, let them off, tie them out of the way, and the sail hangs in a loose gathering, like a blind, and everybody then clears down off the yards, and then the sails are controlled in terms of set from the deck. It's pretty tricky being up on the yards when you've got sails being set while you're up there, particularly if you're not very experienced. So we try not to do that very often. I mentioned the sea stow, which is just get rid of the sail and tie it up. This is a different sort of stow where it's looking very tidy and very tight, and that's called a Harbour Stowe, where the sail is rolled up really tight and tied up very neatly, like this, like the sail above. And that's for going into harbour, where you want the ship to be really smart, to look really everything in order. And sometimes the off watches can be deployed up into the rigging. That looks good as well, and it feels good because you get this amazing view as you go into a new port from the top, 130 feet up into the rigging. There's a less charitable view as well, that the more people up in the rigging, they're out of the way. They don't get in the way of people on the deck when they're trying to do the mooring up. But I'm sure that doesn't really apply. One of the other things we do when we're up up aloft is, particularly with the watch leaders and the deckhands, we're just looking at all the lines. As you can see, there's miles of rope, different types of rope, different sizes of rope. And one of the things we do is, when we're up aloft, is just keep an eye, apart from looking after our watch, is keep an eye on chafe, any pins, any shackles, anything that might look not quite right. And that's really important, because chafe can be a disaster for rigging, complex rigging like this. So we make sure we're fully covered on that front. Pete, I mentioned earlier in the coffee break, he wanted to do a red nose day climb to the top of the mast, and so he did. And I went up there to record his achievement, which allowed him to gain sponsorship from everybody on the ship, as well as lots of friends back home. And one of the things that triggered was, and I found on a few voyages, everybody wants to go to the top of the mast. And so there's some difficult transition points some of the ways up, but they go up normally to the top yard, touch the royal top yard. It's about 130 feet up, and then come down again. And that, with a cycle of watch members, is a real achievement, a real tremendous buzz. And there comes a point in the voyages when people are more comfortable being aloft, not just to set the sails, but if you're off watch, you can go aloft and just be in the rigging, just enjoy the sensations, a unique sensation of being up on a sailing ship. And because of the size and weight, the ship, as you can imagine, over the sparkling seas, is dipping down and rising. So there's a fore and aft rocking motion, generally gentle. And then there's also a side to side sway, which is the passage of the ship through the water. So it's one of those exhilarating feelings once you are secure, to just enjoy being up in such an amazing setting. And there's some people, I'll pick out somebody on the bowsprit. If somebody being on the bowsprit when the ship is sailing is also another amazing feeling, as long as you're not dipping under the water, of course, which would be pretty heavy weather. But it's a great feeling just to be out in such an amazing position. Sadly, it's not always sunshine, as you can see. The consolation is that for most people on watch, they're on watch on the bridge for about an hour. The watch leader would be up there for 4 hours, but for watch members, maybe look out or making some notes or needing to record something or helming, then they're up on the deck for about an hour. So in short order, I'm sure this gentleman this crew member would have been down in the mess, drying off, keeping warm, maybe with a cup of tea and maybe some other job on watch in the dry. And then at the end of the day, the ship is essentially put to bed. The captain issues night orders, and that would include any particular features that needed to be attended to through the night, and also would set the sail plan for overnight sailing. And so you'll see there's 2 foresails have been set, 2 out of the 4 on the bowsprit have been set, and some of the square sails would also be set. And the general idea is that the captain does not want anybody to be needing to go up into the rigging at night. So if there's storm conditions coming through later on, the sail plan would be set in the early evening to reflect that condition may be coming through. Because although we have deck floods that would light the rigging, it's not a good idea to have people up aloft at night in the night time. I have been up a few times when storms have blown up and maybe some of the sails haven't been tied thoroughly, so need to stop them ripping themselves apart. But it's unusual. It's quite exhilarating. Force 10 with the rain. You're as focused on staying up there as sorting out a sail. But yeah, good. Glad I can tell you about it. So anyway, the ship settles down for the night. And this is at the end of a voyage. This particular one was in Menorca. We'd had a fabulous time sailing around the Med and dipping in on every few days into a port somewhere, and came together from being a rather disparate group of people to a real amazing team. And they all went home with amazing magic memories and reflections on what they'd achieved, the skills and the achievements of sailing a square rig ship. And to give you a couple of, there's the gentleman here and the lady here. They were on board to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. This young couple here were celebrating their honeymoon. So the good news was they were on the same watch. The bad news was they were in separate cabins. And they got married on the Saturday and then joined us early on the Sunday morning in Gatwick. And then we flew out and met the ship and then went from there. So we had a couple of really good weeks, sunshine and some good breezes, and yeah, just generally a fantastic trip all round. Well, we'll leave the square rigger and a bit of a change of pace. I'd like to pick up on the yachts. Excuse me just a minute. This is the yacht Olympic that I was a crew member for the Round the World race. And as you can see, the conditions are pretty wild because you have a storm jib and a trysail. I think the winds, well, we call them breezes, but they're up to about 70 knots. So it's pretty wild. But Sir Che Blythe, who organised the racing, the races and the yachts, he ran the race I was on in 2000, oversaw it. He then organised the next one 4 years later in 2004. But then he decided to retire in about 2007 rather than run the next one. And so the yachts became available. He wanted to sell his fleet. And so Tall Ships Youth Trust bought 4 of his Global Challenge yachts and called them the Challengers. And the intent there was that the ships are really difficult to fully crew all the time. Whereas if with 4 yachts, there's the opportunity to, in periods of light demand, to maybe just put one yacht out for young people or for an adult voyage. And as demand increases in holiday times or is it summertime and so on, then that can be they can step up and put up to the 4 yachts on. for sailing purposes, whether it's short voyages or across the Arc to the West Indies, and then some sailing out in the West Indies or in the Med. And in addition to the 4 challenge yachts, there's a 45-foot ketch. So that's the fleet that tall ships currently have. And these are fantastic yachts. They're beautifully designed, 72 feet long, up to a crew of 18. And adult voyages are 18 to 80, and youth voyages is 12 to 24, but it's age bands, so you don't get wide disparities in the grouping of the ages for the crew members. And everybody gets a chance to do all the duties of the yacht, to helm it, to manage the sheets, to help cook and clean and all the other things that go with being on a yacht. And you'll notice that safety harnesses and tethers are just part of the deal, that whenever anybody's on board, everybody wears the life jacket and the safety harness. These 2 young lasses are clearly, there's a bit of competition maybe going on to get something just that bit tighter, and it needs 2 people. The winches are pretty massive, and there's very little on board that you can do by yourself because everything is so big, so heavy. And for example, to change a headsail, they're hanked on and hanked off. To change a headsail may take 4 people or 6 people just to carry it up to the foredeck, because they're pretty chunky things. And so there's a great deal of teamwork going on with the operation of the yacht. And as sailors, I'll show you the snake pit. For many of you, you'll know that the foredeck can be an empty and lonely place, especially if the weather conditions are a bit wild. And behind the mast and in front of the cockpit, there's this area called the snake pit. And this is where all the lines, most of the control lines, feed back to, where they can be managed successfully, and a whole set of things going on maybe at the same time. And by the time a particular operation has been performed, you've got a lot of lines on the deck. And it's really important that they're all cleared up, set away in the way that you arrived at them, because you may come back to them later, or somebody else may come back to them later and need to work them effectively and quickly. And it's even more important when it's dark, that you've got a head torch, but that's all. So you need to make sure that they're always tidied up. Good bit of housekeeping before you leave the snake pit. Typically 2 people working in it at any one time. And you've got not only the lines to look after, but the winches, as you can see, the center winch, pretty massive. It's really tough to do it on your own. So you're working 2 people to get the main halyard up, get the sail up. Down below in the saloon, you can get 18 people around the table, and the table is very usefully shaped. It's a good stable platform, and there have been occasions when it's needed for if somebody's injured themselves, then it's a good platform to put somebody on to help repair them, as well as eating dinner. I won't go into any more details, but they've been used on a few occasions. Oh, it's also a great area when you're hand stitching a spinnaker, because the spinnakers can be anything up to the size of a tennis court. And we had 5 spinnakers on board on the race, and admittedly, for tall ships now, they don't burst spinnakers very often, if at all. But it was a great area to hand stitch a spinnaker for several days. And the bunks require a special mention. On most ocean racing yachts, you've probably got a bit of a shelf or some netting, or maybe a fairly rudimentary bunk. But I must say, these are really well designed, and you'll notice the high sides, and you'll notice the straps on the ends. Each of the ends is adjustable, and the real clincher is that there's a center strap, so that when you're in your bunk for 2 or 3 hours, when you're off watch and the weather conditions are a bit rubbish, then you can lay yourself in your bunk, you tighten up the center strap, and you will not be thrown out. It's really a great way of relaxing, knowing that you're going to be safe, instead of just being half awake all the time, wondering if you're going to be thrown onto the floor, because it really does hurt. So that center strap and the way that the sides can fold in is a great comfort. And then the galley, nice and tight. You don't want lots of space, because one of the things about yachts, when you've got maybe some heavy-ish weather, is that you get thrown around quite a bit. So you want nice and snug working accommodation for producing meals. And then at the end of a voyage, you've got, again, the excitement and the tremendous feeling of achievement from having such an amazing time on whether a voyage of a few days or several weeks. And tool ships, if anybody wanted to buy, treat themselves to a sail on one of the challenges, get in touch with tool ships and treat yourself or treat one of your friends, family, son or daughter. Lots of opportunities. I'd certainly recommend it, as it's even those that sail yachts regularly, it's amazing difference to sail on a monster yacht like that. I think it's important to mention the Jubilee Sailing Trust, which is a complementary trust also in Portsmouth to tall ships, and they launched Lord Nelson in 1986, and I suspect many of you will have heard of Lord Nelson. She was a unique ship in the sense that she was designed to take wheelchair users not only on deck but also up in the rigging and out on the bowsprit. And she sailed all over the world, many hundreds of thousands of miles. But she was retired, I think, a couple of years ago, and is now in Bristol Dock, while the Trust tries to work out what to do with her. More modern ship, Tenacious. For those that sail around the Solent, you may have seen her on occasions. She is similarly equipped with wheelchair access, with braille plates all over the ship to support those that may be visually impaired. And it's just the most amazing platform for supporting people who are not necessarily fully able-bodied. Another tall ship operator in and around England is the Sea Cadets, and they've been sailing training ships since the mid-70s, and this is their latest the latest tall ship, Royalist, where they've taken thousands of Sea Cadets out to experience life on the ocean waves. Well, I'd like to draw things to a close. This is Europa, and in addition to the normal set of sails, they've got stun sails and squares and sky sails in addition. So you can see, I hope you can see the additions where they've added booms out on the yards to carry extra sail. And that's really quite an extraordinary amount of sail to set. But she can be chartered. You can charter one berth or several, and there's a number of other organizations around in different parts of the world, a lot in Western Europe, as well as others in the UK, that they have a commercial charter for voyages of different lengths and different starting points. So yeah, being part of a ship like that is just a most amazing experience. So if you get the chance, I'd certainly recommend it. So I'll now close and say thank you very much indeed for your attention, and I'll ask if there are any questions. I'll stop sharing so that we can see more of our audience, and hand over to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. We now know what life on the ocean wave or a traditional ship is like. Very exhilarating, but you've got to have a good head for heights, I think.
Yeah.
So yes, please, anybody got any questions for Neil?
What kind of cost are the trips on the tall ship organization for a week? Any ideas?
Yeah, hello, Joe.
It depends on the week.
Yeah, it'd be about four or 500 for a week on the tall ships, and or a week on the challenges, something like that. It's typically £400 or £500, and that's all in for food and usual soft drinks, tea and coffee, and all the rest of it. But you don't need anything unless you go ashore, in which case, as usual, whatever costs there are when you're on your own.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
okay, put your hand up. Reaction, hand up.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that talk, Neil. Thank you. I very much appreciate being asked to or allowed to attend.
You're very welcome, Gerard.
And what are the opportunities for the older sailor?
Hi there, Linda. Well, up to 80, and there's one person who I've sailed with on 3 or 4 occasions, and he's got special dispensation. He's 84, and he's been given because he's sailed as an experienced sailor. He's got special dispensation to sail beyond that. But I watch him like a hawk, because one of the things you sometimes find is it's not complacency, but it's a sort of familiarity. And there are times when people think, well, I've done this several times before, a number of times before, and it's not quite the same. And so I've a guy called Brian, and I've tended to watch him very carefully, make sure his harness is correct. He's got a buddy. Everybody buddies with somebody else to make sure their harnesses are fully secured, and the carabiners are done up and everything else like that. But some people I've watched especially to make sure that they are secure. But up to 80 generally.
Yes, but they are open to older people going on these ventures. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, good. We'll sign up.
Anyone else? Sorry, I only see half of you at one time, I think. So please just do shout.
There you go.
Yeah, it's on that.
You want to speak? You'll have to speak up.
No, that's fine.
Oh, I wanted to.
I can hear somebody wanting to say something.
Hello.
Gordon.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you about tacking and wearing ship. If you could talk a bit about tacking and wearing, it would be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's for a square rigger, you don't tack in the traditional sense. You have to, if you're changing direction, generally the wind is from one quarter to the other quarter, depending on just where you want to go. And there's a lot involved where you normally have all 3 watches up to control the set of the yards. And so you turn the ship at the same time as you start bracing the yards, maybe from one side, leaning over one side to the other. At the same time, you gradually steer the ship round. And then you've got to synchronize all the yards on one mast with all the yards on the other mast. So it's you wear the ship round to adjust from one course to another, but it's not difficult. Well, it's one of those things you need to work in synchronization with everyone else, and so there's listening out for commands to control the turn and the set of the yards at the same time.
Yeah, and sort of how long would that take?
You make sure everyone's set up and you've got the right line, you've got the right ropes off the pins and down to a couple of turns, and then there'd be probably 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that people were all ready to go. And then the process itself would take about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, 15 minutes. And then there's the tidying up, securing all the lines after the particular maneuver, and then clearing all the lines up off the deck. And people then carry on about their business, either off watch or carry on the bridge, for example, for those that are on watch.
Yeah. So does that mean something like tacking in the Solent is impossible?
You wouldn't do it very often, and because of the engine, the ships are fitted with engines, so you might set the sails for a reasonable direction, and then just harness engine power for a part of the trip down the Solent.
Well, we all know those that want to get back from Cowes in too.
Yeah.
I think it just makes the sailing on the old sailing ships that didn't have engines just so much more impressive. The boat handling capability.
Yes, and they used to use the highest sails, the royals, were very effective, and the topgallants, the next ones down, they were very effective in being able to steer the ship and adjusting the course without being too difficult to get rid of. When you've done a particular maneuver and you want to, for example, slow down, it's very easy, these smaller sails, to get rid of them quickly, to pull them up out of the way, and then secure them in a harbour, in a sea stow. So, for example, you might have 2 or 3 people up in the rigging, in commercial terms, just handling sails to give you some engine oomph, sailing oomph, and steerage to pick up the higher winds.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were very, very skillful, amazingly skillful people, these sailors, and tough as hard as nails.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Gordon.
Thank you.
I seem to have got a direct message. Actually, it's gone again. Hang on. Question: how close to the wind can you sail? From Jack.
100. So a normal yacht will sail 50, 40, maybe 40, 50 degrees off the wind, whereas a tall ship, maybe you could sort of ghost along at 100 off, 120.
Cool.
But you don't want the wind, strangely, you don't want the wind right behind you, because if it's essentially right behind you, then the foresails are blanketed by the mainmast and the sails on the mainmast. And so you, by coming slightly off the wind, maybe coming over one of the quarters, or in other terms, the corner of the boat, then you're using all the sails that that you can put up.
So Neil, in days gone by, presumably they couldn't really bring these ships into harbours. They had to be at anchor some way out, did they? Because of the manoeuvrability.
Yeah, there was a mixture of skill that they could be brought quite close in. Looking at some of the anchorages, you've got really crowded. In the old days, there'd be a lot of ships in, but sometimes they'd be used. They could be sailed in, sort of, but there'd often be the crew members on the ship would be deployed in boats, and they could row the ship in. Or you had like you had pilots on the shore that would come out to look after the ship, steer it in. There would be people that would volunteer their services for a fee, of course, to be able to row in the ship and then position it ready to put the anchors down. So there was quite a thriving, I'm sure, thriving businesses in terms of managing the ships in and out of close quarters, in and out of ports, for example. And sometimes when they were leaving port, they'd be rowed out to be able to pick up the wind if they were in an estuary or some other fairly limited wind, a light winds area, so they could be helped on their way.
Neil, thanks very much. That was a really interesting talk. Just extending the question, there was a previous question about time for tacking, and it made me wonder what happens if, unfortunately, anybody goes overboard. I mean, this is one of the things that anybody who's done a yacht master will have had to practice, but this is in 40-foot boats, which are relatively nimble. So do you practice that in tall ships, or do you just use a different technique? You just wave goodbye as you disappear?
There's so much paperwork, Piers. No, we
Don't fall over.
it's one of the reasons in all the sailing I've done, and just following tall ship sailing generally, there was one accident that was nothing to do with being swept overboard. Somebody fell out of the rigging and died hitting the deck. But generally, one of the reasons we don't handle the sails when people go up into the rigging and go out on the yards to, for example, let the sails drop, free the sails, then everybody comes down before the sails are then set, because it can be quite an impact on the yard and on the mast when if the sail fills. So we just try and minimize exposure to risk, like being aloft and falling out. Everybody wears a harness, a clip on, make sure all those things are followed. But one of the other things about the ship generally is it's high bulwarks, and so you almost have to throw yourself over the side to go overboard, and the chances of that happening are very, very rare. If there have time like yachting, people have occasionally been seasick, and they sometimes, it's not a picture that you need to dwell on, but they're lining the rail if it's difficult conditions on the lee rail. But generally, again, we, as a watch leader, I'd make sure they were secured, if necessary, clipped onto something for the time that they're struggling with seasickness. But generally, we just keep an eye on each other, and I keep an eye on my watch members. And as we get into the voyage, then it becomes people just know how to move around the boat safely.
I take it, Neil, you've got a small boat on board anyway that you could deploy.
You're right, Gerard. Yeah, there's a couple of small boats. There's a rib which can be deployed very quickly. It's almost on permanent standby, either for mooring, helping to moor, or to go over if needed. The davits are always free. It's practiced in the sense that because we sometimes use it when we're mooring, there's a lot of practice for getting it over the side quickly. So if somebody did go over, they're wearing a life jacket, they would be retrievable relatively quickly, within a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question that's come to me from Linda. Which was your favourite course?
Favorite?
Course. I assume, Linda, do you mean
Itinerary.
yes, voyage.
Yeah. Voyage.
Well, the Canaries and the Med, because there's a better opportunity of sunshine. I think the Canaries are interesting because between the islands there are areas called the wind acceleration zones, and so you've got as you approach some of where you might get winds funneling, you can be sailing along in a 3, but you might anticipate that it's going to go up to a 6 within the next mile, and so before you get hit, maybe the captain, well, in fact, anticipating that with the experience of the permanent crew, there'd be people sent aloft to take in some of the sails, maybe take some of the bigger sails down, or just take them out of commission, just roll them up and take them out of commission. So I'd say the Canaries and the trip to in and around Menorca and the Balearics was also a very pleasant sailing grounds. Yeah, with lots of attractions. Yeah.
No? Scrolling through your faces.
Oh. Who is it?
Mary? Mary and Andrew, are you wanting a question? No. Okay.
No, we were just looking at the Ingram cat.
I can't
Oh,
compete
looks
with that.
very interested in you, Neil, doesn't it?
Every ship has a cat. We know that.
Fascinated.
Excellent talk, Neil. Just lovely.
Thank you, Mary.
One last one from Sylvia, which you sent to everybody. Have you ever done the tall ships, sailed tall ships at Amsterdam?
No, I haven't. There's typically a tall ships rally. They're festivals that
I did Amsterdam Sail 90
Okay, Sylvia.
on the Lord Nelson,
Oh, okay.
and I joined Lord Nelson out there. Yeah, I just wondered whether you had, because that's a just absolutely wonderful place to go when they do those festivals.
Yes.
Beautiful.
I've been to
Neil?
Yes, Carolyn.
This is probably more a question for Trisha, who I think I saw on the other tablet or whatever. But did she know when she bought you that present all those years ago, she was going to lose you for the next few years to actually become part of the volunteer crew?
I'd leave her to answer that.
But were you retired then? I mean, had you retired then, or were you taking your annual holiday on the tall ships?
I was taking annual holidays, but I would normally take 2 or 3 weeks a year on tall ships, and because I worked abroad quite a lot, so I would essentially allow myself extra holidays. So we didn't run out of time. We've travelled the world in a number of different areas anyway. But
well, I rather hope after sailing for 2 weeks around Menorca, you didn't take a caravanning in Wales. I hope you took us somewhere nice. I'll ask the next time I see you walking.
Or Scotland.
Yes. No, sorry, Mary, Wales. I've never been to Wales without it raining. But thank you, Neil. A lovely talk. Thank
you're
you.
welcome. Yeah, I can't remember what I did after my birthday. I might have. Well, most of Trisha's birthdays have been spent in amazing places like Egypt, New Zealand,
Okay.
New
Well
Zealand again. Yeah, we've been some pretty amazing places.
Great.
All you have to do, Trisha, is just nod.
I can't see Trisha. I'm assuming she's smiling.
Yeah.
But thank you, Neil. Thank
You're
you.
Yeah, she's here somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Anyone else?
Oh, there's something up there.
Where?
I'm looking at.
Oh, Pippa.
Oh, Pippa.
Pippa?
Turn us off.
Do you want to unmute, Pippa? You need to unmute, Pippa. No, maybe she's.
No, you need to unmute, Pippa. I can't hear you.
Oh, the delights of Zoom.
No, I was just going to say, sorry about that. I said, fantastic. Thank you, Neil and Trish. And I think challenges will be next birthday present for Jack. And he's Catholic. I'm laughing already.
I think you'll have to mute yourself for the follow-on discussion.
For the day.
Oh dear.
I've got a question from Rob's iPhone. The same. Did I do the same BT Global Challenge as Julian Johnson and Susie? And I think the answer was yes. And I remember that Julian and Susie were both on Quadstone. And when Trish and I were in New Zealand as part of the race, our older daughter Sam was working in New Zealand as a doctor, and she was really taken with the whole thing. She'd helped sail Olympic a bit before we got going on the race. Some of the training sessions she'd come on board, and at short notice, Sam said she'd really like to do this race. So I got in touch with Che and said, "There's a doctor here willing to do a leg," and he said she could come on for Sydney to Cape Town. And if you say that quickly enough, you don't realize that it's the longest and hardest leg of the entire race. That when winds dropped to 50 knots, it was a calm day. So she signed up for Quadstone, and she was on the same yacht, Quadstone, as Julian and Susie. I think I remember meeting Susie in The Hague. Sam and I went to see her in The Hague sometime after the race. But yeah, they had a great team. The Quadstone was got to the point where, believe it or not, there was a mutiny where the crew said either they all got off or the skipper got off. And Che replaced the skipper. And there's a story behind that, not appropriate to go into now. But Sam joined this new team with a new skipper, and the replacement skipper was magical, lovely guy, Richard. And Quadstone had fantastic success, and Sam sailed to Cape Town, and then Trish flew out to join us when she could. But yeah, great experience. But that's a bit off from tall ships, but certainly the Challenger connection.
Yeah. Neil, I have this same problem every weekend with Jack.
He's fallen asleep.
I've got got a question from Linda. Did I ever go to Scotland? I've sailed yachts up in Scotland, the west coast, around the islands, and with RBYC. We've had the most fabulous times, but not on a tall ship.
Okay, Canaries were much better.
And Steve Norton, hi Steve. Steve's asked, what's left on the sailing bucket list? Well, I've been looking at the Pacific, and it's an awfully big area. But Trisha's giving me the. We were at one point thinking of, I was going to sail to Antarctica, and Trisha was going to fly down, but we haven't really worked that one out since COVID. So we may do something else. So no, I don't know what's left on my bucket list other than maybe, Steve, some thoughts about the Pacific or parts of the Pacific, other than around New Zealand, where I've done some sailing.
Well, whatever it is you do, Neil, enjoy. Thank you for the talk.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Very much. We can only dream, really. It all sounds
Yes, we're all looking forward to it.
terrifying, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, in time we'll get there.
But also, now I know what the link is between the Tall Ships Youth Trust and the Global Challenge. So I hadn't realised they were connected in that way. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, very interesting evening. And I'm sure everyone would like to do a Zoom clap.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah, really great, Neil.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thank you.
Great pleasure.
And it is recorded.
Thank you.
I think.
Thanks,
No,
Neil.
it is recorded.
Yeah, it is recorded.
Okay, good.
It's all
Okay.
the little
Please.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very
Then
much.
the cat is on there then, Carolyn.
The cat's on a runner.
No, he's not a runner.
Hector, come here. Hector.
Come on.
Anyway,
let's
thank
go
you,
and
Neil.
see-
And we'll say
I want
goodbye.
to see your new puppy.
Okay. Lovely to see everybody, and we look forward to sailing
Bye.
before
Yeah,
too long.
that was great.
Yeah, bye.
Take care. Keep well.
Thank you, and you.
Thanks, Neil.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep. When they go quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Right,
you all.
turn the recording off. Yes. Okay. Stop for